The next topic is demographic change, and it's the first of three different streams. The fil rouge is, with the previous presentation, we learned about Ernst's grandmother that was concerned about religion, about family, and about other interests. The next three sets of presentations relates to the demographic change, but also the future of work and the changing geography of life. We are moving from the individual to the set of society, so how the choices of single individuals and eventually of governments impacts what we all are going to do in our lives and in the countries we decide to live into. We can decide to use different sources of information. These sources of information provide us with very different information about demographics, baby boomers, women participation in the workforce, and very, very diverse information that sometimes are consistent across sources of information, sometimes are very diverse. And looking in this case to the economist, we learned that the increase of population is sometimes positive and sometimes negative, depending on the angle that we are considering, sometimes depending on the people that commissioned the article, or sometimes depending on what we really want to extract from the topic that we are looking into. Now, demographics is not a perfect science. There is not a set number of things we can look into, and we need to define the whole to deep dive into the topic. So what we are going to do first is to define the methodology we are going to look into, and precisely we categorized the dimensions of demographics into 6 different topics that are mutually exclusive and that allow us to better understand what demographics mean. Because if we look just at the ancient Greek meaning, demographics and demos means population, but population means, as we all know, many things. The class now, today, is a very good representation of demographics. We are from different age ranges, different gender. We have lived in different countries, and we have eventually different religions and backgrounds. So we all know that we cannot address demographics just looking at the population size, but we need to take into consideration other elements. For example, age, gender, social clusters that we create, the religion that we want to address and eventually change over life, and how it affects the behaviors of each of us. Deep diving first into the population, we all know, we all hear and read that the population is going to peak 9 billion in 2050. It is going to have implication in water consumption, in food availability, in the availability of land and consumption of buildings, and all the consequences. But few people are looking into what's going to happen next. The population in 2011 might peak something closer to 30 billion or might decrease. And the impact is going to be driven by many effects, all correlated, and there is no statistical model that can explain clearly what's going to happen in 90 years from now. But for sure, the effect is going to be driven by what is going to happen in Africa. And Africa is not for sure an easy market, and is a market different from all the others that we have seen. We know that it's the increasing market for consumption of champagne, so it can be considered as a luxury market to a certain extent, but it was also the market where, until the collapse of RIM, we saw the increase of consumption of BlackBerry. BlackBerry was considering this as the first market, and was actually considering this such a cool market that rappers were going to mention BlackBerry in the songs. And it was something different to Europe, to North America, and to any other country in which RIM was operating before what we all know that happened. But at the same time, we know that population size is going to affect also the age ranges. The second color that you see, so the deep blue, is going to represent what we have today. It's still a pyramid. It's not true for the whole world. In Japan, it's an inverted pyramid already, and in Germany, it's more looking like a kayak. Now, our product director, Ralph, is going to be like the exception because he has 2 children, but many people in Germany are not complying with this rule and actually are shrinking the population. This is what we see, and this is what we can observe for the years to come. In 2030 and 2050, the central part of the age ranges is going to increase, and that means a lot of things for the companies that are addressing people in this age range. And in 2100, which is the red line that you see, it is the first time where the base of the pyramid is going to shrink. The 2 effects that we can get from this pyramid are first, that the central part of the pyramid is going to enlarge. in every single age range. And the second effect is that for those at the top of the pyramid, already in the next 20 years, those aged 65 plus are going to move from 500 million to 1+ billion, meaning that those companies targeting exactly this age range are going to face an increase in the market share that is natural. So it doesn't mean that we need to go and get those customers stealing from competitors, but we need to be able to address the needs of this increasing population. That will not happen overnight, but it's going to happen throughout the spread trend in the next 20 years. Something has already happened, but it's going to keep increasing and keep moving towards this end. Age is, of course, not the single effect of demographics, but we also look at the female involvement in the workforce. Now, women, we all know that depending on the culture and the background of any country, have a different involvement and recognition in the workforce. But what is important to recognize is that actually this is strictly correlated to the GDP per capita of the single countries. The U curve is going to represent that the countries on the right and left hand side, those with the lower and higher GDP per capita, are going to have the higher contribution of the women, of female in the workforce. The very big difference is that for countries with the low GDP, women are not going to be economically recognized for the contribution, so are going to eventually not to have salaries. On the other hand of the curve, the women, of course, are going to be paid, and the trend is moving towards an equalization of salaries. But what we want to look at in this graph is also that the trend, the U curve, overall, also for the countries in the central part of GDP per capita, is shifting towards the upper part, meaning that the women contribution and participation and openness of the market is going to increase over time. And this is also represented by the purchasing power. If we look in a whole of the income of women in a compelled way, we can see that actually this is bigger than the GDP of India and China. And if we also look at the increase that we can observe over the last years, the percentage increase of women income is higher, is the same as the GDP increase of India, and is slightly smaller than the GDP increase of China over the same period. Keep moving into the topic, we have another dimension which relates to the middle class. Middle class is growing, has been growing for the last decades, and we can see that there has been a constant increase into the percentage of people belonging to the middle class. The increase has not been booming, and we can already say that it's going to be a big boom driven by the population increase. It's not said, and there is a debate, because population increase means also certain factors like migration increase. Migration increase means that people with lower income eventually move with countries with higher income, lowering the average of the middle class. But indeed, what we observe is actually that the middle class, with all the consequences on purchasing power of the middle class, is gonna, let's say, boom, more than double over the next 20 years. This is driven by many factors. Nonetheless, taking into account, of course, also all the topics that we discussed before, the increasing population and the increased participation of certain parts of the society into the workforce. But at the same time, this is driven by the fact that countries that were lag behind before and that were experiencing a great divide between the low part of the society and the higher part are going to spread the wealth across different social classes. And if we look at Asia Pacific, we are going to observe a 3 digits and 600% increase in the size of the middle class. Now, depending on the definition, but in this case we are including in the Asia Pacific, not just the Asia Pacific per se, but also India. And you can understand that in this graph, in this yellow part, the 25% of the whole global population is included. So this part of the world, when the middle class is increasing, the purchasing power of billions of people is going to shift, and it's going to matter a really different consumption behaviors of all the people that belong to these classes. At the same time, shifts in consumption, in behaviors, and in social habits is going to impact and is going to drive also changes in religion. We read many times that Christianity is and was the leading religion, and behind were Islam and unaffiliated, meaning by unaffiliated those that do not recognize themselves as linked to any religion. But this is not going to be the same in the future. The increase in unaffiliated is going to be a 40+%, and the increase in Islam is going to be bigger than the Christianity. In certain countries, Islam has already overtaken Christianity with respect to the past 20 years, and unaffiliated are going to shape a bigger part of the societies. Which are the implications? We will see them later, but actually the first hint of this means not just on the consumption patterns that are eventually driven by religion, like alcohol consumption, food consumption, but are going to be also related to how the companies behave internally in the countries where there is a Christian, Muslim, or an affiliated majority in terms of work hours and work habits of the employees. And this is going to be more and more important for global companies that have to adapt the HR practices across continents and across countries, and eventually across regions of the same country. These are single topics taken individually that already give some hint of the trends and the implications. But of course we can move forward and take into consideration few of them together. In particular, if you look at religion, income increase, and the increase on the middle class, we can try to look at what happens to the households. You might have heard about the household itemization term that can be explained to two different effects. The first one is that the households number is going to increase in percentage more than the increase in the world population. And the second effect is that the households are going to be smaller. Now, I grew up thinking that the household is the place where a family live with the children, and eventually in certain societies also with the grandparents. What we observe is that now 1 out of 5 households have children, and oftentimes the household is the single individual that live alone and spend his own life searching for a partner, but eventually also enjoying the single life and owning a house, renting a house, buying goods, and spending the time in his own or her own household. This of course affects the consumption of energy, because it's different having a house where many people live with respect to having a house with a single person commute to work every day and eventually use electricity in the morning or at night. But at the same time affects also consumption behaviors. When I was younger, it was very common to see in supermarkets big packs of family-size goods. Now we tend to see more and more single quantity goods that just need to be heated up and eaten at night when someone comes home after gym or after just coming back from work very late night. So to wrap up, we have looked at many single dimensions and put together all of them looking at one single element, which is households. Going back to the age pyramid, this is the trend. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we can explain everything to root causes, going to the trends and looking at the implications. Specifically in this case, the age pyramid can be explained by many factors, but looking at the three main can be the better access to food and water, the healthcare improvement, and the change in social habits that explain how the pyramid is shifting and changes. There are of course implications of the businesses. For the businesses, we mentioned some of them along the discussion that relate not just the consumption side, but also the behavior of companies towards the workers. To look at the trends is something relatively easier, but it's not something that can be done without looking at the root causes and consider the implications. What we tried to do has been to provide you with a methodology that can allow you to look into different dimensions, to apply the same methodology in the future, because it's impossible to look at implications for the future without keep looking at the trends. And this is the reason why we would like to invite you to the workshop that is going to be run after, and is going to exactly looking into the root causes and into the implication of these trends and how to apply the framework that we have just seen to the different contexts of your industries and your businesses. Thank you.